Otis Ray Redding Jr. was born in 1941 in Dawson, Georgia, and raised in Macon. To understand his rise, you must first understand the world he was born into, Jim Crow, Georgia. In the South of the 1940s and 50s, segregation was law and culture. Black families had to live in separate neighborhoods, attend separate schools, and drink from separate water fountains. Social norms dictated that black people show deference to white people in public. To challenge that order was to risk your job, your safety, or even your life. Inside the black community, survival meant resilience. The church was the center of life, a place to worship, but also to dream and to resist quietly. Music flowed from the pulpits, shaping boys like Otis. Gospel gave him not only a voice, but a shield against a world that wanted him silent. Otis admired Little Richard, another son of Macon who defied the rules and made it big. But Richard had to tone down his wild act to cross into white markets. The lesson was clear: talent could open doors, but the system would always demand control. This was the same lesson Sam Cooke learned in Mississippi and Chicago. Both men came out of the church. Both men understood the power of ownership. Both were daring to break free of an industry that exploited black voices while keeping the profits. And both men, as history would show, would not live to fully claim their independence. In 1962, Otis got his break at Stax Records in Memphis, when he stepped into the studio after Johnny Jenkins finished a session. His song "These Arms of Mine" was recorded, and suddenly a new star was born. But breaking into the industry wasn't just about talent. Radio ruled everything. And radio was controlled by Payola, secret cash bribes paid to DJs by record labels to guarantee airplay. If a label didn't pay, the record didn't spin. This meant artists like Otis weren't just fighting for their songs to be heard. They were at the mercy of a system where white executives decided who succeeded. Otis didn't just want to sing. He wanted control. He wrote his own songs. He built his own publishing company. He was learning from Sam Cooke, who had already started carving a path toward independence. But moves like that threatened the machine. Because publishing wasn't just paperwork, it was power. And in 1960s America, power in the hands of a young black man was dangerous. At Stax, Otis developed his signature sound with Booker T and the MGs. Unlike Motown, which polished its acts for white crossover audiences, Stax was raw, southern, and unapologetically black. Otis recorded Respect, a song demanding dignity. He wrote I've Been Loving You Too Long, dripping with vulnerability. His voice carried the soul of black America: pain, hope, survival. Behind the music, Otis was studying the business. He noticed how labels pocketed millions while artists struggled. He knew Payola dictated who got played. And he knew that by writing and publishing his own material, he could sidestep some of that control. These were not small moves. These were revolutionary in an era when most black artists signed away their rights for pennies. Like Sam Cooke before him, Otis was becoming not just an artist, but a businessman. And history shows, the industry never rewarded a black man who wanted both. By the mid-1960s, Otis wasn't just a Southern soul star. He was breaking into white mainstream America. His tours in Europe drew massive crowds. In London, in Paris, in Scandinavia, audiences who barely spoke English sang along with him. Back in America, that was dangerous. The system was built on keeping audiences divided. Black music was for black charts. White music for pop charts. By pulling everyone into the same room, Otis was breaking an unspoken rule. A black man commanding integrated crowds with nothing but his voice and passion wasn't just entertainment. It was revolution. Sam Cooke had done the same, refusing to play segregated venues, demanding access where black performers weren't welcome. Both men blurred the line that the industry fought to keep sharp. And in 1960s America, that kind of influence came with a price. The civil rights movement was exploding. Black communities were demanding justice, marching in the streets, challenging America's conscience. Otis wasn't overtly political like Nina Simone, but his songs carried the weight of his time. His cover of Sam Cooke's A Change Is Gonna Come wasn't just a tribute, it was a promise to his people. His mere success, his ability to unite black and white audiences, was political in itself. And he wasn't naive. He saw the dangers. Speaking too loudly about racism or exploitation in the music industry could cost you everything. Sam Cooke had tried to step into that space, using his own label and speaking out, and he ended up dead under suspicious circumstances. Otis was following the same trajectory. He wanted independence. He wanted ownership. And he wanted his voice to be more than just entertainment. That made him powerful. Too powerful. In June 1967, Otis Redding walked onto the stage of the Monterey Pop Festival in California, and walked straight into history. Up to this point, Otis had already earned his crown as the King of Soul among black audiences in the South and on the R&B charts. But Monterey was different. This was a predominantly white, countercultural crowd. Rock bands like The Who, Jefferson Airplane, and Janis Joplin were the headliners. The expectation was simple. Soul singers weren't supposed to steal the show. But Otis did just that. Backed by Booker T. and the MGs, Otis unleashed raw power, energy, and charisma that stunned the audience. His voice and magnetic presence left thousands of mostly white fans in awe. When he performed songs like Respect and Try a Little Tenderness, it wasn't just music, it was a cultural explosion. That night, critics wrote that Otis Redding had redefined soul music for America. Suddenly, he wasn't just an R&B artist confined to the race charts. He was bigger, broader. He had officially crossed over. And in 1967, that was dangerous. The music industry had long profited by keeping black artists in their lane, making sure soul singers stayed on black radio, while rock and pop were reserved for white acts. Payola ruled the industry, with record labels and radio stations controlling who got airtime. Black artists often saw pennies compared to what white artists earned covering their songs. Otis breaking into white America's living rooms meant he could bypass the gatekeepers. He could speak directly to the mainstream. That kind of crossover frightened the establishment. Because when an artist like Otis gained visibility across racial lines, he became more than a singer, he became an influencer. He became someone who could unify audiences in a country still divided by segregation, Jim Crow, and racial unrest. Monterey didn't just elevate Otis's career, it painted a target on his back. Overnight, he was being courted by the rock press, invited into circles once closed to black performers, and compared to Elvis Presley in cultural significance. And just like Sam Cooke before him, Otis was beginning to talk about ownership. He wanted control of his publishing, his image, and his music. For an industry that thrived on exploiting black talent while keeping power centralized, this was a threat. After Monterey, Otis Redding was no longer just a Southern soul singer. He was a cultural force, one that could not be easily controlled. And in the turbulent climate of 1967, being that visible, that powerful, and that outspoken could make a man a target. By late 1967, just months after Monterey, Otis Redding was on the cusp of transformation. He was no longer satisfied with being boxed in as just an R&B singer, confined to the so-called race charts. His vision was bigger. He wanted to create music that could live anywhere, in the South, in the North, on black radio, on white radio, and beyond America's shores. Then came Sittin' on the Dock of the Bay. Recorded in the fall of '67, this song was unlike anything Otis had done before. Stripped down, haunting, reflective, it wasn't the fiery soul shouting of respect or the explosive power of try a little tenderness. It was contemplative, even spiritual. Otis was evolving, daring to blend soul with folk and pop sensibilities, creating something that was both universal and timeless. And here lies the danger. Dock of the Bay wasn't just a song, it was a message. Otis was saying to the world, I can do more than what you expect of me. I can step outside the box the industry put me in. I can reach anyone, anywhere. For an industry built on categorization, exploitation, and payola, that was threatening. Because once an artist crossed boundaries, he no longer needed the gatekeepers. He no longer played by their rules. Even more unsettling to the establishment was the timing. The civil rights movement was at its height. Black America was demanding justice, equality, and freedom. White America was clinging to segregation, control, and fear. For a black man to not only dominate the black charts, but also command mainstream, largely white audiences, and to do it on his own terms, that was revolutionary. Some believe Dock of the Bay reflected more than Otis's musical growth. They hear in its lyrics a man aware of the storm around him. A man who understood that success came with a cost, that being vocal about pain, isolation, and longing was in itself a subtle form of protest. While Sam Cooke had openly declared, "A change is gonna come," Otis spoke in metaphor, capturing the loneliness and fatigue of a man who had carried too much. The industry, however, saw numbers. They saw that Otis was about to become bigger than ever before. He was poised to enter superstardom not as a product of their design, but as an artist in control of his destiny. And that made him dangerous. When Dock of the Bay was released after his death, it became his first posthumous #1 hit. It cemented his legend. But it also raised questions. Was this the music the world wasn't ready for him to live to create? Was Otis on the verge of leading a cultural revolution through his art, one that those in power couldn't afford to let happen? At the moment of his greatest breakthrough, Otis Redding wasn't just singing songs. He was rewriting what it meant to be a black artist in America. And that is exactly when his voice was silenced. On December 10, 1967, Otis Redding boarded a twin-engine Beechcraft H-18, bound for Madison, Wisconsin. With him were members of his touring band, the Bar-Kays. They were scheduled to perform at a local venue, another stop on what seemed like a never-ending climb toward superstardom. The plane never made it. In freezing, stormy weather, the aircraft crashed into Lake Monona, just miles from its destination. 7 people died. Only one man survived, trumpeter Ben Cauley, who would later say he awoke in the icy waters, clutching a seat cushion as his bandmates disappeared beneath the waves. The official explanation was pilot error, combined with poor weather conditions. But to this day, questions remain. Why did this particular plane fail, when Otis had resources and other options? Why was a star of his magnitude flying in such conditions at all? And more importantly, who stood to gain from his death? Because the truth is, there were beneficiaries. Otis Redding was only 26 years old, but he had already begun building something few black artists dared to dream of at the time: ownership. Like Sam Cooke before him, Otis wanted control of his music, his publishing, and his future. He had founded his own record label, Jody's Records, and was exploring ways to manage his career outside of the tight grip of the major industry players. 4 record companies, radio executives, and promoters who thrived on payola and exploitation, this was a dangerous precedent. An empowered black artist was a threat to the system. And let us not forget the money. After his death, Otis's unreleased track, Sittin' on the Dock of the Bay, became his first #1 hit. It sold millions, earning his label and distributors enormous profits. His estate, meanwhile, would remain entangled in industry contracts and agreements that ensured the bulk of that money went elsewhere. Just like with Sam Cooke, death turned out to be more profitable to the industry than life. Then there's the political climate. By late 1967, the civil rights movement was at a boiling point. Martin Luther King Jr. was only months away from his assassination. Black voices that carried mass influence, whether in politics or in music, were often silenced. For Otis to emerge not just as a soul singer, but as a crossover icon capable of uniting audiences across racial lines, was revolutionary. And revolutions, history shows, rarely go unchallenged. Was the crash purely an accident? Perhaps. But when you look at the bigger picture, the timing, the trajectory, the profits, the parallels with Sam Cooke, it's hard to ignore the shadows. Otis Redding was on the verge of breaking free from industry control. He was evolving into a cultural leader. And then, in the blink of an eye, he was gone. The silence that followed was deafening. But the industry kept moving. The records kept selling. And the machine that thrived on payola and exploitation kept spinning. To this day, many believe the official story leaves too many questions unanswered. Was Otis simply another victim of fate and weather? Or was his death the convenient end to a rising force that threatened the status quo? One thing is certain: the ones who lost the most were the fans, the community, and the movement that never got to see Otis Redding's full power realized. The ones who gained, those who controlled the business of music, and those who knew that silencing a powerful black voice could preserve their hold on the industry just a little longer. When Otis Redding's voice was silenced in December 1967, the world lost more than a singer. It lost a visionary. At just 26 years old, Otis had already reshaped the landscape of soul music, and yet, he was only beginning to tap into his full power. His passing left a void so deep that decades later, fans, musicians, and historians still wonder, what could have been? In the months following his death, Sittin' on the Dock of the Bay soared to #1 on the charts, becoming the first posthumous single to achieve that feat. It sold millions, carrying his voice far beyond the South, far beyond the black community, into homes around the world. The success proved something the industry had long feared. Otis Redding wasn't just a soul star. He was universal. His music transcended racial, cultural, and generational lines. And that is why his legacy remains untouchable. Artists who came after him, from Al Green to Aretha Franklin, from Marvin Gaye to Stevie Wonder, carried echoes of Otis in their phrasing, their passion, their insistence that soul music was not just entertainment, but truth. Decades later, even rock icons like Bruce Springsteen and Mick Jagger would cite Otis as a primary influence, proof that his crossover appeal wasn't temporary, but timeless. But Otis's impact went beyond music. His story became a cautionary tale for generations of black artists navigating the treacherous waters of the industry. He embodied both the dream and the danger. The dream of owning your art, your voice, your future, and the danger of how threatening that independence was to those in power. Like Sam Cooke, Otis's trajectory showed that when a black artist demanded more than stardom, when he demanded control, the risks multiplied. His death also shined a light on the darker truths of the music industry. The exploitation of artists, the stranglehold of Payola, and the way the system often profited more from an artist's death than from their life. These patterns didn't end with Otis. They repeated with others, from Jimi Hendrix to Tupac Shakur. The machine survived, while the voices that dared to rise too high were silenced. Yet, despite the tragedy, Otis Redding's music lives on as an act of defiance. Every time Try a Little Tenderness builds to its explosive climax, or Dock of the Bay drifts across the radio waves, his spirit refuses to be erased. His songs are reminders of what was possible and what was stolen. Today, Otis is remembered not only as the king of soul, but as a pioneer, a man who broke barriers, crossed boundaries, and carried with him the weight of a movement, even if he never lived to see its full triumph. His legacy is carved not in stone, but in sound, in the notes that continue to inspire, uplift, and challenge. And perhaps that is the greatest legacy of all. Though the plane crash took his life, the system could not silence his voice. Otis Redding remains eternal, a reminder that music, when it carries truth, can never be destroyed. Otis Redding's career lasted just 5 years, but his impact was eternal. He gave soul its raw honesty. He gave Black America a hero. And he gave the industry a problem it could never fully solve, an artist who refused to be controlled. His death came too soon. But his music never left. From Al Green to Jay-Z, from Aretha Franklin to Kanye West, Otis's influence runs like blood through the veins of American music. The industry may have silenced his voice, but it could never kill his truth. Otis Redding wasn't just the king of soul. He was proof that when black artists fight for ownership, for dignity, and for freedom, their legacy becomes unstoppable. And that's why, even in death, Otis Redding still speaks.